So as Ian said in his introduction, I've been a journalist for a long time. I'm based in Los Angeles. And my career, the bulk of my career has been in newsrooms, all different kinds of newsrooms, from, you know, hyper-local digital to legacy. He mentioned the LA Times, to international wire service at Reuters, to local TV news. I worked at the Los Angeles NBC station for years. So I have a broad understanding of the opportunities and challenges of a wide range of newsrooms. As Ian mentioned, I also teach journalism at the University of Southern California, so which is a great opportunity to see and understand what the next generation of journalists are interested in, and the challenges they face. And it's also really heartening to me to see that young people still want to join the profession of journalism at a time like this, where we are encountering so many challenges around news avoidance, and also just challenges around how to get news to people. So 2 years ago, I joined the Solutions Journalism Network as the Director of Journalism School Partnerships after a career working in newsrooms. The Solutions Journalism Network is a nonprofit founded by 2 New York Times reporters because of things like what Ian was describing: news avoidance, concerns about news out of balance, misrepresentation. And that really appealed to me after a career as a working journalist, because I see a great urgency in working on improving how news is created and delivered. And this is it's been a great opportunity to try to support that and help journalists understand how they can do their jobs in such a way to connect with communities and better report on communities. And so that's what we're going to give you here today in this pretty brief time together. If any of you are journalism educators and after this are interested in learning about how to teach this, I'm the person you'll want to get in touch with. I lead intensive workshops on how to teach this approach. So if this intrigues you after today's session, please feel free to reach out to me. I'm happy to support you in incorporating this approach into your teaching. I'm really excited for today. Nina and I have a wonderful array of offerings for you, some interactive, as Ian mentioned. So I'm looking forward to digging in, but for now I'm going to hand it over to Nina.
Thank you, Sarah. These are 2 wonderful introductions, and I feel like that I don't have much to say anymore. But yeah, I'm Nina Fasciaux, and I'm based in Nantes, France, where, as you can see, summer has finally arrived. And I'm working for the Solutions Journalism Network for 4 years now, as the manager in Europe. And because I'm the only Asian staff member working outside of the US, I pretty much do everything, going from supporting G schools educators who are interested in solutions journalism, but also supporting journalists and highlighting their work, building a network of solutions journalism practitioners, and also giving trainings to newsrooms and journalists in all Europe. My path to solutions journalism is interesting because it actually is because of my experience in Russia that I came to solutions journalism. When I lived in Russia for 5 years as an editor, as Ian said. And I think when I left France for Russia, I had the same understanding of Russia as what the media were offering to me. So that was quite negative, and I was just confronted with my own bias when I started to live there. And I understood that everything that I was told about Russia was true, but it was also false because it was more complicated than that and more nuanced. And a lot of stories were untold. And a lot of these untold stories were solution stories, how Russia might do better in confronting some issues, or, you know, people trying to solve problems in Russia that we don't hear about. So that's my way to solutions journalism. And for the last 4 years, I've been working part-time as a freelance journalist. That's why I could write the book that Ian mentioned, and part-time as a manager in Europe for Solution Journalism Network. And since last February, I turned a full staff member at SGN. So now I'm fully dedicated to training and trying to empowering journalists with the tools that we have that we will share with you today. So I'm gonna be the one who share the screen. Hopefully everything goes smoothly, but we'll kick off with a test for you to just get started and better understand why we're here. So Sara, do you want to explain
Sure.
how we'll do this?
Yes. So first I want to reiterate something Ian said, which is that, you know, Nina and I are both we do a lot of trainings, and we're used to them being very interactive. So Ian's driving the chat, which means that if you have any questions or comments or anything you want clarification on or have questions about, please just go ahead and drop it in the chat and he'll share it with us, because we don't mind being interrupted. We actually appreciate it because we get bored with just hearing ourselves talk. I don't know if you've ever heard the expression sage on the stage, but that is the opposite of how we approach our work. And I think we have as much to learn from you all as you do from us in terms of the challenges you're facing and questions that you ask. Your questions actually help us understand better what it is that people need to know and what they're struggling to understand or what they'd like to know more about. So it's very helpful to us as well to hear from you. And to sort of warm up your fingers and get you in the mood to participate, we're going to start with a quiz. And the way this is going to work is you're not going to take it individually, don't worry. This is going to be a shared quiz. This is going to be a collective quiz. We're all going to take it together, meaning each question will have one answer. And the way this is going to work is I will drive this in terms of reading the question, which you'll also see on the screen. These are multiple choice. You will put your choice in the chat. Ian will tell us which response has the most votes, and that's the one that Nina will put into the quiz. We'll get to the end and we'll see our score. All right. Ian, are there any questions? Is anyone asking any questions? Is everyone clear on how this works?
No, complete silence right now. Let's go with that right now. Let's just accept that.
So before we start, everyone, this is timed. So once you see and understand what the question is and what the multiple choice answers are, very quickly type in your choice, right? Because Ian's gonna have to cut it off at a certain point, because if we don't get the answer into the quiz before the 45 seconds are up, we just get marked wrong. And what a terrible thing that is to not even have a chance to answer it correctly. So you need to be on your toes and be paying close attention. All right, Nina, I think we are ready to begin.
Great, let's go.
All right. Okay, question number 1. In the last 20 years, the proportion of people living in extreme poverty worldwide has almost doubled, remained more or less the same, or almost halved. Drop your response into the chat, and Ian is going to tell us which one has the most votes. Almost doubled, remain more than or less the same, or almost halved. In the last 20 years, the proportion of people living in extreme poverty worldwide. A, B, or C, Ian? No pressure.
I'm pretty much across the board. I would say almost equally divided between them. A, C,
we don't get
A,
to have
B.
2. It's multiple choice. We can only pick one.
Yeah, A, C, A. I think A probably.
Okay.
Too late.
Oh, see, gotta be quick. Gotta be quick. Gotta be quick.
Okay.
Ian, this is on you. This is your fault. How many of the world's 1-year-old children today have been vaccinated against some disease? 80%, 50%, or 20%? How many of the world's 1-year-old children today have been vaccinated against some disease?
Getting lots of
I like how people are doing ABC. That's great.
Yeah,
because that makes it easier.
C's, A, C. B, maybe it's B.
Let's go with B.
Yeah,
we
let's
gotta
go B. Yeah.
quickly.
All right,
Moving on.
next.
All right, next one. How did the number of deaths per year from natural disasters change over the last 100 years? The number of deaths per year from natural disasters, did it more than double, remain more or less the same, or decrease to less than half? And the ABC seems like a good way to go. So
yeah.
more than
A,
double,
B,
remain more or
C,
less the
D,
same,
A,
decrease to
B,
less than half.
B. I'd say maybe. Oh, there's another A. I was going to say B. There's another A from Jim. Oh, I will. Let's go A. Let's go A.
Let's go A. Let's go A. All right. Ian, you look so worried. He's worried that he's not representing you all accurately.
I'm going to be loser in this
advance.
quiz.
All right. Where does the majority of the world population live? Low-income countries, middle-income countries, high-income countries, A, B, or C? The majority of the world population.
Lots of A's. So I think definitely A. A couple of B's, but I would say definitely A.
If the majority is A, then we'll go with that. Great. Moving on to number 5. Worldwide, 30-year-old men have spent 10 years in school on average. How many years have women of the same age spent in school? So worldwide, 30-year-old men have spent 10 years in school on average. How many years have women of the same age spent in school? 9 years, 6 years, or 3 years? A, B, C.
I would say B is probably the most popular answer.
All right,
there.
Great. Thank you. We're getting better. All right, number 6. There are roughly 8 billion people in the world today. Which map shows where people live? Each figure represents 1 billion people. So the map on the left would be A, the map in the middle would be B, and the map on the right would be C.
Murray's saying C, and Murray knows a lot about stats and data. So I'm gonna say C, I think.
Okay. All right. Thank you. All right. Number 7. The United Nations predicts that by 2100, the world population will have increased by another 4 billion people. What is the main reason? More children under age 15, more adults 15 to 75, more very old people over age 75. Although I would argue that the language there, 75 is not that old, right? Anyway, more people over age 75. So A, B, or C? We only have 15 seconds left, folks. So
I would say C.
Okay,
there.
Great. Thank you. All right, number 8. In low-income countries across the world, how many girls complete 5th grade? 20%, 40%, or 60%? A, B, or C? 20, 40, or 60%?
A seems to be the most.
Thank you. Got it. All right, number 9. We're coming down to the wire here. We've just got a few more to go. There are 2 billion children in the world today, aged 0 to 15 years old. How many children will there be in the year 2100, according to the United Nations? 4 billion, 3 billion, or 2 billion?
Again, A, probably the most popular answer.
Got it. All right, number 10. Here we go. How many people in the world have access to some electricity? 20%, 50%, or 80%?
I think C seems to be the popular answer.
Great, thank you. Number 11. What is the life expectancy of the world population? 50 years, 60 years, or 70 years? The life expectancy of the world population. A, B, or C?
Getting a lot of B.
Okay, let's go B. Number 12, and then we just have one more after this and we can see how we did. Tigers, giant pandas, and black rhinos were listed as threatened species in 1996. Since then, have any of these species become more critically endangered? None, 1, or 2 of them? A, B, or C?
I'm getting lots of B's and C's. I think C for that one.
Okay, great. And here's the last one. The global climate experts believe that over the next 100 years, the average temperature will A, B, or C. Get warmer, remain stable, get colder.
Almost exclusively A.
I think this one was a gimme. All right, how did we do? Let's see our score. We got 15% correct. 2 out of 13 right. Now the first one we're going to blame on Ian. And I will also add the caveat that I know that several of them were equally divided or evenly divided. So some of you may be saying, if I had done this myself, I would have gotten a much higher score, which may well be true. And we will send you the link to this website if you're asking questions or wondering, like, how did they come up with these questions? What's the data? It's actually all documented on the site. And if you're interested in seeing how they came up with the questions, all that information is there. But the larger point is this: say we even got 5 right, or 6 right, or 8 right, that's still, you know, not a really awesome result, right? Because these are questions dealing with big, important concerns, global concerns, things that we all think about all the time about, you know, what is going to happen? How is the environment? How is the population? How is poverty? How are people doing? And the reason that we like to give this quiz is because it helps us understand that often our perceptions are not very well aligned with reality, right? In terms of how bad things really are, right? Often, we think things are worse than they actually are. Not that things aren't terrible in lots of ways, but in general, there are things that are going on that are responding to a lot of these problems. And there are ways in which many of the issues that we're concerned about are being addressed. Not solved, not entirely ameliorated, but addressed in some way. And the news doesn't keep up with that very well, because journalists don't do a very good job, don't do nearly as good of a job of telling the public when things are working. We're very good at telling the public when things aren't working. And so part of what we're going to talk to you about today and show you is how you can incorporate that kind of reporting in a very rigorous way into your journalism, not to sugarcoat it, not to tell people things are better than they are, not to detract from the fact that there are huge challenges that we're facing, but also not to create this constant drumbeat of gloom and doom that is actually not an accurate representation of what's going on in the world, right? And that's what this quiz, I think, is a good sort of reminder to us about. It's not saying that everything's hunky-dory, but it is saying that our perceptions of reality don't always match reality. And some portion of responsibility for that mismatch lies with journalists and journalism and how we are presenting this information to the world. And so what this approach can do is provide some additional resources to journalists to ask some additional questions in the course of their reporting and incorporate this into the work that you do, to develop this muscle of asking about responses, in addition to reporting on problems and telling people this very important information when things aren't going well, but not stopping there and continuing on with your reporting. So this is what this quiz, I think, does a good job of reminding us, that there is work to be done and we have the power to change that narrative. That's one of the wonderful things about journalists and journalism, is that we have the power to tell these stories in a more accurate way. Ian, were there any questions or comments regarding the quiz, or was it all just responses?
Thank you so much. People seem to like it. People seem to enjoy it.
Yeah, and you can, this is a good party trick, especially now that we all live on Zoom. You can just drop this into your virtual happy hour and have everybody take it, maybe after a couple glasses of wine, see what happens. It might be kind of fun. Okay, so I'm gonna hand it over to Nina.
Thanks, Sarah. We wanted to go back to actually what Ian mentioned at the beginning of the session, is what does the fact that we think things are worse than they are, and the fact that the media is mainly telling negative stories, what impact does it have on the audience? And the first impact is that people disengage from news. And I mean, I'm a journalist, and honestly, when something happens, and especially during COVID, I myself just turn off the radio. I can't stand it. It's just not human for day after day to hear about the same old story that it indeed has a negative impact on my mood. And so the research that Ian mentioned at the beginning is made by the Reuters Institute, and it was done in 2017, and it proved that the main reason why people disengage from news is because it's too negative. And this has evolved in the bad way. More and more people disengage from news. If you take the United States between 2017 and 2019, there are 3 points more Americans who disengaged. Worldwide, it's the same. The British even more. And in Japanese, it almost doubled. So that's the number of people who avoid news. And the main reasons remains the same, that it can have a negative effect on my mood. I selected a few of the comments that were given when the research was done, and I wanted to share it with you. I dare you to look through the titles of the Metro newspaper. I guarantee every page and headline has a negative word embedded in it. Energetically, the news is salacious and draining, so I protect myself from the fear factory as much as possible. No one should ever feel helpless to change events, and so on. And we usually ask, when we give trainings to journalists, we usually ask them, why did you decide to become a journalist in the first place? And no one will ever answer, well, to get this kind of comments, or to be pointed out as the fear factory. And again, going back to the COVID-19 coverage, Rasmus Nielsen, who is the director of the Reuters Institute for the Study of Journalism, gave an interview to journalism.co.uk. You can find the interview online. And he said that much of the public will very soon be sick and tired about reading about coronavirus all the time, because they feel that a lot of the material that is put in front of them is not material that helps them in their lives and makes them anxious, worried, and feel helpless. So that's an interesting point, because it makes you anxious, but it also doesn't give you the information that you need to improve the way that the world is doing and the issue you're facing. And Rasmus, in the same interview, suggested that solutions journalism could be one of the tools that journalists could use to prevent this to happen. Our learning objectives for today, and if you do have a learning objective that you want to share with us in the chat, please feel free to do it, is first to define what solutions journalism is, because there are lots of misunderstanding of what we're really talking about. Look at examples of solution stories that use our 4 pillars, which are the criteria we defined to make sure solution journalism is rigorous, and get started on how to do it. We'll give you some tips on how to look for solution story, what questions to ask, and what to be careful about. Ian, are there any?
Yeah, just a quick question from Ruth. Ruth says, I agree about the effects of the news and avoiding stories like these. So why are newspapers, and probably mostly tabloid newspapers, doing more of these stories? Doesn't it suggest they're popular with readers?
That's an excellent question. I had this conversation with Mark Rice-Oxley, editor of the website at The Guardian, so the solutions journalism vertical at The Guardian. And he was quite honest about it. He was saying, you will never sell as much as you do when you are covering a terrorist attack. And this is sad. But it doesn't mean you only have to propose that project. You can decide to level up the debate around certain issues that are, coming back in the news decades after decades. And also we have multiple research and studies at SGN that proves that solutions journalism and reporting on responses to problems also sells. So I would say it's not either doing, reporting on problems or reporting on solutions to know what sells best, but just doing a product that is more complete and more accurate and just a better product for your news consumers. Sarah, do you?
And yeah, I would add to that. I've worked on digital platforms for many years, and most particularly when I was working in local TV news, which in the United States can be the broadcast equivalent of tabloid journalism. It's very, it's very much about covering crime and crisis and very fear-driven. So I'm very familiar with that model. And I'm also familiar with audience behavior around that model. So Ruth, I think you're absolutely right that those stories do drive clicks, right? So people will click on those stories, but they don't stay. There's actually a study that was done by a professor at Pepperdine University here in Southern California on audience behavior around different kinds of news. So it really depends on how you're measuring and what you value in terms of audience behavior. If you are looking for clickbait, if you are looking for those clicks with which I think tabloids by and large, that's fine with them. That's all they really want. That kind of story satisfies that. If you're looking for, if you want to build a relationship with your audience and create loyalty to your platform and create accountability with a community, stories that include responses and a sense of hope are much more likely, according to this study that this professor at Pepperdine did, and I can share a link with Ian after this if you're interested in seeing that. Those kinds of stories actually create more interest among audience, and they stay on them longer. So there are lots of different ways to measure. And it depends on the outlet and what they're interested in, and also their revenue model, honestly, right? Because if your revenue model is based on clicks, there's no incentive for you to do anything else. So there are lots of factors involved in that. And there will never be, as Dina said, there will never be any shortage of this kind of reporting. It will, sort of sensationalized negative reporting. It will always be there. So that's just going to be there.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Go ahead.
Thank you, Sarah. Just a kind of a follow on from that. Austin asks, because I'm sure this is a criticism you hear often, what is your response to the journalistic idiom that news is something someone doesn't want other people to know, and then the rest is just PR puff?
Yeah. Absolutely. That's how I learned journalism. I learned journalism in a very traditional form. My first job out of journalism school was the LA Times. And the watchdog role of journalism is extremely important. Journalists need to expose wrongdoing. The problem with that truism is that it doesn't work, because what happens is, and what's happened more and more, certainly in the United States, journalists do this great job of exposing wrongdoing, which is incredibly important. And by the old paradigm, then civic institutions, community members were supposed to kind of come in and out of their shock and alarm, address those problems, and rectify the situation. But over and over, we've seen that that doesn't actually work. And what happens is the problems are exposed, nothing happens. So the journalists keep exposing the problem and they keep doing that story. And it just creates a bigger and bigger divide between the community and the journalism, where the community is like, well, so what about it? What about it? And so what solutions journalism does is it creates a sense of accountability. There is rigor to it. And Nina's going to get to that in a minute. It isn't advocacy. It isn't PR. And we're going to go into more detail about that. So keep that question and hold it. And if by the end it's not answered, we can get back to it in the question section.
Great. We'll let you carry on with the presentation.
All right, thank you. So as I said, we want to first define what solutions journalism really is and what standards we created at SGN to make sure this is rigorous and not fluffy, as we just mentioned. Sara, do you want to introduce it?
Right, so what I'm going to talk about now is the definition of solutions journalism and then the basic sort of elements. Now, I want to say here before I get into this, many of you will probably be like, this is nothing new. This is no big sort of like secret sauce. And I agree. What happened was when these two New York Times journalists founded the Solutions Journalism Network 6 years ago, what they wanted to do was create a framework and sort of a definable approach to articulate what this is and how it can be practiced, because they felt like it was missing from a lot of journalism. So the idea isn't like, here's a brand new thing that we just made up. It's more, how can we describe this thing that's missing from a lot of journalism and create a shape and a form so that journalists can see it and understand it, right? Name it, claim it. It's like naming a thing that exists and describing the key elements to help guide journalists and incorporating this into their approach. So that's where this definition comes from, and that's where the 4 elements come from that I'm going to show you next. So solutions journalism is rigorous, evidence-based reporting on responses to social problems. That's the definition of it. I also want to say that the name solutions journalism itself is somewhat problematic. It's a bit of a misnomer because, responses to social problems are not a solution. It's not like, okay, that problem's fixed and solved. We're not going to fix climate change by, one response to climate change doesn't solve climate change. It's a response that's responding to and sort of chipping away at this big problem. So if we were going to give it the proper name, it would be something more like, effective responses to social problems journalism, but that's really long and sort of unwieldy. So we just kind of have to go with solutions journalism, even though it can be confusing to people because they think, well, you're not solving anything. And that's absolutely true. It's exactly what this says. It's a response. It's an evidence-driven response, right, to a social problem that's very deeply reported. And so what are these elements?
I want to add before we go into the elements that also the term solution suggests that this is the right solution that you're reporting on. I don't think there are perfect solutions and that there are no solution that lasts because the world is changing so fast. So responses is really what you will be looking for when you're, as a journalist, when you're reporting on solutions.
Great point, and something that we will continue to talk about throughout this presentation. So here's one example, right, of a couple ways to do a story. It's very important to do the story on the left, right? You need to inform the public that there are coronavirus deaths and that hospitals are in crisis. That's extremely important. And what else can be done? What other stories can be done as you follow the development of the crisis in Italy? What can be learned, right? So you could just continue every day to do that same story. What's the new death toll? How is how bad is how much worse is the crisis today? And I know what that's like. I mean, I worked at a wire service. It's like, You can just kind of incrementally move that same story along every day. And as you do that, you know, what happens is your audience is like, I don't need to know that there are, you know, 12 more deaths today. That's just, you know, I know it's getting worse. Thank you. But it's not that you don't need that information, but what else can you ask? What other questions can you ask? What else can you do with that story? And that's where a solutions journalism approach can enhance and expand and deepen and enrich your reporting, and serve a greater purpose for your audience.
This is an interesting example because the article on the right is actually about a failure, and you can absolutely do a solutions journalism story about a failure as long as we can learn a lesson from it and we can just elevate the public debate around it.
Shall we move to the next one? All right.
Yeah, go ahead.
So these are basically the 4 key elements that we have kind of distilled that go along with that definition. Rigorous reporting on response to a social problem. So these are the 4 key elements you want to look for as you're doing your reporting. The first thing is that it covers a response to a problem and how that response came about. So if you're reporting on something for the first time that people don't know about, that's probably not the right time to do a solutions journalism story. You need to get that information out there, or you need to expose the wrongdoing. You have to set the table. You have to let people know, here's what's wrong, right? Once that problem is well known and people know about it, that's when your opportunity comes in to start covering responses. So is this a response? And also there needs to be something going on, right? That is responding. Who's doing something? Not an individual so much as a group, an organization, a community effort. There could be an individual at the center of it, but you want to focus on the work they're doing, right? And how that work is having an impact. So you need to have a response to the problem and how that response came about. How did they come up with this response, right? So that's the first element.
Can I add that?
Yes, please do.
The how question really drives your narrative when you're doing a solution story, because you don't want to just let your audience with a sense of, I didn't get how this response worked. And that's when it seems like you're selling a solution. If you explain how it works and you know how a program or whatever, a group or a community came from knowing about a problem and solving it, then that's what your narrative is about.
Yeah, that's great, Nina. Yeah, it's not as if you're saying, okay, here's the answer. You're saying, here's something that's being done. How did you come up with this? You know, where did it come from? What led you to think that this would work, right? And then the second one is evidence, right? So you want to say, okay, well, what's working? Can you show me? In what ways is this working? And you can have, you know, qualitative and quantitative examples. So you can have anecdotes. Of course, you know, we're all storytellers. We want to have a great story to tell. So what are some stories about the effectiveness of this approach, that it impacted people, it improved the situation? And if there's any data, if there are any anything quantifiably, anything measurable to show improvement over time, impact on community, that's really important. So you're looking for both of those. And if you have both, that is really helpful. Just as with any good story, anything you can do to really dig into the efficacy of what you're covering can be really helpful. And so you're not looking for something where someone says, I have an idea and I really want to help people. That's not a solutions journalism story. That's like, you know, oh, good for you. Good job. Good luck. I hope it works. Come back to me next year when it's underway and let's see how it went, right?
I had an interesting exchange with a journalist a few weeks ago, and that might help understanding this is she wanted to do a story about a policy that will be implemented in France, but it was because it has proven working elsewhere in another country. I don't remember, probably Germany. It's always the Germans. And so a solution story would be look at evidence that why and how it worked in Germany and ask the question, will it work in France? But the story is not about the French project or the French theory about what it will be and debating whether it will work or not. Go ahead.
Thank you. Yeah, that's really helpful. So we've talked about that a solutions journalism story, you know, when you're asking your questions, you know, would this approach work here? The first thing you want to say is, well, is this a known problem? And then you want to be able to say clearly, what is the problem, right? And then, okay, so what is the response, you know? And then how did that response happen? Is there evidence of effectiveness? Do I have qualitative or quantitative evidence? Not just, you know, an idea, a hopeful idea, but is there something I can point to in my reporting that shows that there is evidence that this is working? The third element is insights. And this goes to the larger question of how you do your reporting and go beyond sort of, you know, really deifying an individual or sort of putting a person and their awesomeness at the center of your story. So instead of that, instead of saying this person is so great, because there's no insight there. It's just like, okay, you're a great person. No one can really replicate that because there's only one of you. But if you say, okay, well, what is this person doing? What is it about the action and the activity that's having an impact? And are those actions and activities replicable? Are there lessons that can be learned by others that they could take and apply in their own communities? And that's where the insight occurs. It's like, oh, wow, they're doing a completely different thing that others haven't tried, or they adjusted the known model in a way that seems to be having a greater effect. Wow, that's a cool idea. I can try that idea over here. So you're looking for lessons learned, a replicable model that can help others respond. Not just an inspiration, not just like, wow, that's a cool person, I'm really inspired by them. You know, you're really looking for the details in the work itself. And then finally, and this again is just really, it's good journalism, right? What are the limitations? And there are always limitations. A response might be effective under certain conditions or for a certain community, but not another community. Or it may require a certain amount of funding or a certain amount of support from, you know, local decision makers. There are always limitations. And so you want to make sure that you do justice to those. You know, one thing I find so interesting among journalists is, on the one hand, we're very committed to our watchdog reporting, and we do a really good job of describing things that aren't going well. But when we do a story on something that we think is working, it's like we're afraid to tell people what's wrong with it because we feel like somehow that's going to like be less persuasive, when in fact, it's actually a key to making sure that the story is legitimate and thorough. You must include that. And it's funny to see that this is often the piece that folks really struggle with because they don't want to show what's behind the curtain, but that's essential. It's the combination of being rigorous and also showing something that's working. You have to do both for these stories to be really effective. Nina, did you want to add anything to that?
No, I'm good.
Okay. Do we want to take questions here or do we want to move on? What's your, oh, should we talk about this? Oh, yeah, so here's another way of thinking about it. Thank you, Nina. So again, this is kind of just reiterating another way to sort of think about it and help you remember those points. If you look, you know, it's the whole story, right? What response does it address, right? What is the response that you're focusing on? What's the how done it? That's how did this response come about? You want your offering insight, the limitations, and evidence of impact, right? So it's the whole story. It takes all the things that are going on with this response and presents them to your audience in a way that shows how it's working, where it came from, and the limitations and insights so that it could be replicated elsewhere.
Any questions, comment, Ian?
I think, well, just comment from Maria just about the importance of there needs to be facts in there. You know, it can't just be opinion or hopes or I think that's the point that Maria is making. I don't know if you've any thoughts on that.
Absolutely, Maria, you're 100% right. I mean, this is, you know, I teach journalism, and this approach is a really great way to reinforce that with students who are just learning how to do journalism. You can't just say, well, I think this, or isn't this a good idea? You have to have the evidence. You have to have the reporting, and reporting on how this came about, the reporting on what's the evidence, right? It's not just what a nice idea, or I think this is a good idea. You're reporting on something that's already out in the world. That's the journalism.
Great. And we've got a couple of other questions, but I think they might be better asked maybe once we've gone through a little bit more of the presentation.
That's good. So we're gonna share, hopefully, a video, and Sarah just beautifully explained the 4 criteria of solutions journalism, and we would like you to keep those criteria in mind while watching the 5-minute video, and share with us afterwards what is the most challenging to identify, if any.
Yeah, and before we go to the video, so this is one example, and it's a way for us to experience a piece of solutions journalism together. It's from Vox, which is a news outlet you're probably familiar with. The video is available, and we can share it with you to watch again later if you like. And there's also an accompanying text story. So the purpose of showing you this video is both so we can have a shared experience of a solutions journalism story, and you can think about those 4 elements, you know, response to a problem and how it came about, evidence, insights, and limitations. And you can look for those as you're watching this. And you can also see how solutions journalism stories can be told in many ways across any platform, right? So there's a text story with this. If you're more text oriented, you can look at that later. If you are a visual journalist, if you do, or a multimedia journalist, you can look in here and see all of the different uses of multimedia throughout this, right? So that's another reason why we wanted to share this with you, so you can see all of the possibilities around using a solutions journalism approach in your storytelling. And so as you're thinking about it, as Nina said, and thinking about, you know, what you feel is well represented and what isn't in terms of the 4 qualities, you can also be thinking about the visual storytelling and if you feel like it's effective in conveying the solutions journalism approach visually. So those are just some things to keep in mind.
Let's go. Oops. Can you see it? Can you guys see? Okay.
Yep. Yep. Do you want to just play it?
If you imagine a typical American city street and you take away the space that's dedicated to cars, you aren't left with very much. There's some narrow walkways on the side and some bridges in between them, but not much else. Cars dominate cities. You spend some time walking around most cities and you'll find yourself pushed to narrow sidewalks, waiting for crosswalk lights. You'll find cyclists navigating really narrow strips of space.
Americans are used to cars the way that fish are used to water. And that's so ubiquitous in the US that I think most people, it just never occurs to them that it could be otherwise.
But what if there were a way to change that, to give space back to pedestrians and bicyclists, and to make cities more friendly to life outside of a car? It turns out Barcelona might have a solution. In 2014, the city was faced with serious air pollution problems. Barcelona and its 35 surrounding municipalities consistently failed to meet the EU's air pollution in the region was causing 3,500 premature deaths every year. Traffic in the city also causes severe noise pollution. So the city developed an extensive urban mobility plan with the hope of reducing traffic by 21%. The coolest part of the plan were these things. They call them superilles. Superillas? Sí, superilles. That translates to superblocks. It's this urban design concept intended to minimize the presence of cars in city centers. The word superblock has been used before to describe huge city blocks without any passageways for cars, but that's not what's happening here. So here's how Barcelona's plan works. You take 9 square city blocks and you close off the inside to through traffic, so buses and big freight trucks, or any vehicles that are trying to get from one part of town to the next, have to drive around the perimeter. Inside the super block, the speed limit is kept to 10 kilometers per hour. That translates to just over 6 miles per hour. And curbside parking is replaced by underground parking. And that means you wind up with street space for markets and outdoor games and events.
Within this 9 square block perimeter, you're going to have kind of a pleasant streetscape where people can walk around and mingle and do things without this kind of constant fear of cars around.
The concept is going to be tested out in 5 neighborhoods, but the city has identified 120 possible intersections throughout the region where it could be implemented. So how do we know what the results of this kind of plan would look like? Well, northwest of Barcelona is a city called Vitoria-Gasteiz, which has implemented superblock designs since 2008. In the main superblock at the city center, pedestrian space increased from 45% of the total surface area to 74%. And with so much less traffic, noise levels dropped from 66.5 decibels to 61 decibels. Most impressive of all, there was a 42% reduction in nitrogen oxide emissions and a 38% reduction in particle pollution in the area. And on top of that, business is up.
What you consistently see when people change their streetscapes to prioritize human beings over cars is you don't see any decline in economic activity. You see the opposite. You get more people walking and cycling around more slowly, stopping more often, patronizing businesses more. And that kind of that center of social activity will tend to build on itself.
So here's the question. Could something like this work in an American city?
Barcelona has some unique advantages getting started on this plan in that a lot of it was built before cars and a lot of it was built on a simple grid.
The district of Eixample, which is where the superblock plan is based, was designed in 1859 in this repetitive grid structure by this guy, Ildefonso Da. He basically invented the word for and the study of urbanization when he laid out this grid plan for Barcelona that evenly distributed resources like schools and hospitals. But superblock designers insist that cities don't need a simple grid structure to implement this kind of plan. It can work anywhere. Now, cities in the US have attempted some car minimizing projects like this. The problem is they're usually done in wealthier areas with lots of existing businesses. Zoning policies often require separation of residential areas and commercial areas, but an ideal walkable area would be a mix of the two. On top of that, zoning minimums on parking availability encourage the presence of cars and parking lots, and minimums on street width make for really wide, unwalkable streets. And because of that, walkable districts are basically isolated luxury items in the US. What makes the Barcelona plan different is that they aren't setting aside one fancy neighborhood or town square to make pedestrian friendly. Instead, by proposing superblocks throughout the entire city, they've declared car-free spaces a right for everybody, no matter what part of town they're in.
Maybe this might be overly optimistic, but I think it's sunk in the US that the model whereby every city resident comes with a car and drives a car everywhere is just inherently limited. It limits the growth of your city. It limits the health of your city and the growth of your city. So one way or another, we have to find ways of having a lot of people live close to one another without all of them having cars. Being able to get around and work and play and live and have enjoyable lives without cars.
And today, this is how the American road looks.
Did it work well for everybody? Okay, great.
So I just want to be mindful of the time, but I do want to see if anyone wants to share any thoughts about this. If there was, as Nina asked, anything that you thought it did well or didn't quite hit the mark on? What do you think in terms of the criteria? If anyone wants to drop thoughts into the chat. What did you think about this example?
No comments yet,
Okay.
Sarah, but yeah, it just struck me that it did a great job of actually, highlighting the difficulties in taking one solution and applying it in another context. But at least they asked those questions and they made that clear, that it wasn't just a one size fits all.
Yeah, and that's great, a great observation, Ian. And that's a classic form for a solutions journalism story, is taking a response that's working in one place, really digging into it, like it says here, how does this work? Really describing it, and then applying it to whatever place you're focused on. So Vox is a US-based outlet. So I'm like, okay, well, how would this work in the US? Could it work? What would be the limitations and challenges? And I thought they did, as you said, Ian, a nice job of exploring both where the possibilities are for the US and what the challenges would be based on design and policy, So before we go to see if is there?
Yeah, I'm sorry, Sandra's just making the point that the example we've just watched clearly applied each of the 4 pillars in order. It was done almost sequentially, wasn't it? It was almost as if they'd been to one of your presentations.
Yes, shocking, right? So here it is broken down. How does this work, right? So the first part really explained it in a nice visual way. I hope you were all sort of seeing how they incorporated lots of different, visual tools, including photography, archival footage, data visualization, all kinds of ways to really convey visually the story and the response. So the super blocks, describing what that is and how it came about, the evidence, they had some really good data points and so this was interesting. It was kind of like Barcelona was the example that they were using, but how did Barcelona come up with this? Well, so that's where that first question is really important. Well, Barcelona, how did you come up with this idea? How do you know it's going to work? Well, there's this other town, right? And so that helps you deepen your reporting when you really slow it down and ask, where did this come from? How did you come up with this? And that actually is where the evidence often comes from. It might be another step back to a previous version of the same response that's going to get you your evidence, something that's been around for longer, right? That's had more time to develop. So even though the focus was really on what they're doing in Barcelona and the plan, the evidence came from where Barcelona got the idea in the first place. And we've got some good evidence there. Insights, a couple of insights, right? It's really going to work if it's understood that everyone has a right to this kind of living opportunity, right? That it isn't just for certain communities. And the limitations, which really are, especially in the US, around the things that Ian pointed out, around different types of geography, different kinds of zoning. So this is, just kind of a summary. Are there any other questions?
Yeah, just Rosemarie asks, is it advised that you stick to that order of the 4 pillars or can it be a combination? Can you mix them around?
I think you can just mix and match any way it works for you. That order does work really well, but if your story lends itself to a different sort of arrangement, we're going to show you the story tracker at a certain point, which is our repository of stories like this. And you can sort of dig in and see there are all kinds of different ways of doing this, but you can certainly do it in any order that works for your story.
Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Nina, we can't hear you, Nina.
I think your headphones are not working, maybe.
Here, now?
Yeah, that's better.
Yeah, explaining what solutions journalism is, we found useful also to explain what we think is not. And this is not a value judgment. We're not saying, the things that are not solutions journalism don't have their own space in the media landscape. It's just not what we mean by solutions journalism. So not hero worship, but really going from anecdotal and individual stories to what is systemic, what is the systemic change behind one personal story, or what can apply to it's applied to a community or also a country. It's really what's scalable that interests us. Not a theory, we already talked about that, but it's really about something that is already in the process, that already showed evidence and limitations, not a theory that you would debate. It's not an opinion article advocating for one solution that you think might work, but you're not sure because it hasn't been tested yet. On a medical aspect of it, it can be, a solution story about a vaccine that is not yet proven to work is not a solution story. That we've seen a lot. Yeah, but it's positive because I'm telling the stories of the research around, the COVID-19 vaccine. But it is useful, but you can make a solution story out of it yet. Not a magic bullet. We insist that we really tone down the rhetoric. I often advise the journalists, well, if you're seduced by a solution, that's normal. You're a human being. Maybe, the guy that you interviewed was nice, and maybe you really thought that was a good solution that might work. But once you have written your story, just take out all the words that are extra positive, that don't add anything to the story, but it's going to bring more credibility if you just stay as objective as possible. We planned the time for questions right now, but maybe we don't need to, since we already took a lot of questions, and save it for later.
Yeah, I think, if anyone has any questions, you want to put them into the chat function now, but if we'll give you 10 seconds to do that if you have anything at this point. Otherwise, we'll just
and you'll get another chance, or a few other chances.
Good point.
Okay.
Yeah, I think we'll just keep going, Nina. Thank you.
Great. So we wanted also to give you examples of solutions journalism and tell you the stories of a few newsrooms who decided to try it. Because of COVID-19 and the situation we're in, and I think that's a great example of the flow of news, that you have a huge problem that is true for globally. Like, a lot of countries, a lot of people were concerned at the same time, and you have the death polls, and it's just negative day after day, and after a few weeks you just want to tune out. So we created a special fund for newsroom that were tempted to try solutions journalism on COVID-19 and around its impact and economic impact, but also what impact it has on our social lives and stuff. So we did have a few European newsrooms who got the grant, and they did a series about how to maintain social relationships while being under lockdown. Mediacité did that, and also stories of solidarity in Europe with the COVID-19. And the local did, so the local has 9 newsrooms across Europe, and they did a series on multiple policies, but also multiple initiatives that worked during the COVID-19 crisis. And it concerned, economic issues, social issues, but also what can you do when you have to reopen your school, and what works in terms of social distancing with kids. And so lots of problems that were really shared by lots of countries, and they did a great job. So I just wanted to share this. Mediacité is the French local investigative newsrooms. They have 4 newsrooms in the 4 biggest cities of France outside of Paris. And they started to do solution journalism about 2 years ago. It was really trying because, you know, there are traditionally investigative reporters, but they could feel that the audience were tired of just exposing wrongdoing without showing the possibilities for solving problems. And so they started, and early April, they did a wonderful survey among their members and asking, are you tired of us covering COVID-19? And if, you know, if yes, what should we do else? Or if no, do you think we should do things differently? And 1/3 answered, we don't want to hear about COVID-19 anymore. 1/3 answered, well, you're doing a great job and I want to hear about the impact of COVID-19 locally. And 1/3 said, I want to hear about local solutions around me for, you know, the consequence of COVID-19. And so they launched this series. It's really an investigative series. I think they published 6 stories, and they decided, because they heard so much, the members could send stories idea, and they heard so much beautiful ideas that they decided to continue. And now they have a platform for investigating how the cities change under lockdown and COVID-19 crisis and what should stay. So it's a second solutions oriented series. The BBC, as you mentioned, Ian, is famous for its solution journalism series, and one of them is So I Can Breathe. It was in 2017, I think. Yes. And it was exploring solutions to air pollution across all departments of the BBC. So they had video material, audio material. It was on radio, on the digital platform. They really explored formats and all types of topics and solutions. The website that I mentioned earlier is the solutions article at The Guardian. And I wanted to talk about this piece particularly because it's a wonderful long read with great visuals. And I like it because it helps change the way we think about a country. And I think solutions journalism can also do that, change the way you think about a location. And so this is a story of there is the sleeping sickness in DRC, and I think 2 years before the story was done, more than 5,000 people were dying from this disease in DRC, and 2 years after the program was implemented by local doctors, they had only 800 deaths. You have to look at the numbers in the article because I'm not sure, but it's about that. And it really looking at one initiative that was implemented locally by local doctors. And it's a really great story of, well, systemic change about, you know, one problem that has been there for years. One series that we really love at SGN also is a series from the Cleveland Plain Dealer. It's a local newspaper about the lead poisoning in the paintings. So, you know, in the homes that were built in the 70s, there is lead, and it has a bad impact on health, and it's especially hard on kids and pregnant women. And so this is of the kind of issues that are so universal. Every country has its own lead poisoning or whatever is the reason. And it's a story about, you know, what can we do for a problem that has been there for decades and has not shown any progress, and how can we cover the story differently so that it has an impact. And so they really, it's not properly a solutions journalism series. It's not only a solutions journalism series, it's an investigative series about that problem. But they choose to first do a recap of what's, you know, what's the situation like, what are the places in the city that are concerned about the problem, and then also going to look at other cities in the States with a similar context and a similar problem that I had taken measures and had encountered success and a better results than in Cleveland. And so it's really what Sarah was saying earlier, how to link investigative reporting with solutions journalism is really about, you know, you have exposed the wrongdoing, you have done your watchdog role. What new information can you bring to your audience so that can just help them make the right decision? And so turning your role to a guide dog.
Yeah, and I want to add there,
yes.
Nina, that in the case of the Cleveland Plain Dealer, this is the perfect example to respond to that question earlier about, you know, if it isn't exposing wrongdoing, then, you know, it's PR. So the Cleveland Plain Dealer and the reporters who worked on this project, as Nina said, it was, you know, it was an investigative project to expose wrongdoing. And they worked really hard, maybe for 2 years, to collect all the information, to surface and expose and call to account the leadership, the city, the municipal officials, the state officials. And the story made a splash, right? This, you know, the original investigative reporting made a big splash, and everyone's like, oh, we're shocked to learn about this problem. We're going to form a committee, right? So, you know, they think, okay, job done, right? And that is the traditional journalism model. You expose the wrongdoing, and the civic leaders in the community comes in and they respond, and the problem is addressed. Well, that didn't happen. There was this kind of flurry, and then it just kind of went away. And so these reporters continued to report on it, and they got increasingly frustrated that they continued to do stories saying, by the way, the problem is still the problem. And they do another story, problem's still here. And the response was always like, yes, we're working on it, and nothing happened. And at some point, the city and the state were like, well, we're doing whatever we can do, and there's just not that much that we can do. And that's when these two reporters said, well, that's ridiculous. They had really invested a lot in exposing this, and they weren't satisfied with that answer. And that's when they, as Nina said, went and found other places. You know, Cleveland isn't the only place with the lead poisoning problem. So they said, is anyone responding to this in a way that's actually working? And they found an example. But so that's where this connects, right, with investigative journalism, is that what we do so well is we put the problem out there and then we walk away. So what they did is they didn't walk away. And so Nina's gonna tell you what happened.
Yeah, and so, well, I just want you to, on the right side of the screen, you can see the political impact that the story had. And that's the kind of impact that you usually see for traditional investigative reporting. But this was also, well, this happened because they show that you could do something about it. And it's just taking away the excuses for inaction. And so, you know, people have been fired, and they took concrete resolutions and published list of banned homes and so on. And the policy they implemented was inspired by the story of Rochester, who did really well at tackling this issue. So that's one example that really proves solutions journalism can be investigative. So you'll tell us, and many people tell us, well, it's just good journalism. Well, yeah, it should be. It should be, and I have the secret hope that we won't have to advocate for solutions journalism one day, and it's starting. I can see in a period of 4 years working for SGN. At first, I was really, kind of advocating for solutions journalism. Now I'm just explaining it, which is different because people also learn from the audience that it's needed. So yeah, it makes journalism stronger, more complete. We've said that it just gives a more complete and accurate picture of an issue, a topic. It strengthens accountability, as we just saw. And it's also about investigating problems that are right in front of us, also engaging with your audience, asking them what is the most pressing issue for you right now, because to make sure that your audience stay engaged with this most pressing issue, you need to also talk about the solutions. And I think I'm going to stop there for examples, unless you want to say something, Sarah.
No, I think that's great. I saw there was a question about
yes, Ruth was asking, is it enough to find a story that meets the whole structure? And she's saying, because I guess it doesn't guarantee that editors will be interested enough to commission, or if you're a freelance, buy your story. So I guess that's maybe about, correct me if I'm wrong here, Ruth, but maybe some bias against solutions journalism that we might find in some newsrooms. Some news editors, features editors may just not, buy the solutions journalism approach.
Well, it really depends on the newsrooms, and we often advise to freelancers. When a newsroom is promoting or doing solutions journalism, and in that case, you better, just highlight the fact that your story is solutions journalism. And if not, then it's just a good story, and it's also a story that is being told with a new angle and with a new frame. You kind of flip the frame, and that's what makes your story powerful.
Yeah, and if you're new to this approach and you're a freelancer, I agree it's probably good to try pitching to places that are known for being very receptive to and actually actively seek solutions journalism pitches. And we have a list. We can give Ian a link to it, a list of news outlets, not just the news outlets, but also the editor to pitch and how much they pay. So you could look through that and see if any of those are ones that you'd be interested in pitching to. Because if you're new to the approach, it's hard to be new to an approach and approach a newsroom that might not be familiar with this, and try to do an effective pitch and not get kind of like either get completely turned around or have them be confused. So to sort of build your own confidence in it, it's great to work with editors who are actually seeking this and will help you develop a really good story. And we have a list of those we can provide.
Great, Ruth, thanks you for your great answers.
Thank you. So we're going to share a few tips about how to do solutions journalism and how to get started. And then Sarah will show you a few of our resources and how to stay connected with us before we just take time for more questions. The key questions for solution stories, and really this is to get you started. I always tell the journalists, just write on a post-it who is doing better, and when it's relevant, ask yourself this question. So facing that same problem, then my community or my audience or my country, who is doing better and at what scale? And that will lead you to the potential solution story. How does this response work? Again, the how question is really what drives your narrative. What metrics matter? Who is the response not working for. That's totally okay and even needed to acknowledge that. What does the research say about it? What do experts say about that solution that you found? What do critics say? Because we don't want to oversell the solution. Is it being replicated elsewhere? Replication is often a way to measure success, or also a way to express possible limitations, as we've seen in the video. What are the barriers to replications? We also have a list of more than 24 questions around COVID-19 to guide you into, flipping the frame from here's the problem, how could I make a solution story out of it when it seems like it's just so dark? And we can send you those as well. So just if you have to remember 2 things from this 2-hour session, I think it's the 4 criteria that we mentioned at the beginning, and then these 2 questions: who is doing better, and is there a possible solution angle to this story? I think that's 2 questions that can help you in your daily work. Just look for information that are not coming to you, but you might want to look after. I think David Bornstein, the co-founder of the Solutions Journalism Network, says problems scream and solutions whisper. And so a way to have that, really, it's an action to go and look for solutions when you're a journalist. And again, isn't just choosing a story advocacy? Well, just let's not overclaim or predict the future. As I was saying, a solution will probably not last in the time, and we don't know if some of the consequences we don't know yet, and that's really important to keep that in mind. Paint the full landscape, give the full context, because sometimes a solution works somewhere because there were advantages, the right person at the right time at the right place, and that's okay to acknowledge that also. Make your story about the idea behind the program, and the program is just the illustration. That's what goes back to insights. Also, how can you make sure that your story will also be useful for other people than the one impacted by the story, and tell the audience about limitations. And just as a reminder, I've put the slide again about the 4 criteria, so you can, I don't know, do a print screen, or just if you have questions that you didn't have earlier about one of the criteria, we are happy to answer those. Before we show you our resources?
That's great. Thank you, Nina. And Sarah, thank you both very much. Lots for us to digest there. Some of us may already be doing this kind of work. And actually, Nina and Sarah, just while people are maybe thinking of the questions they want to put into the meeting chat, it just occurs to me, in my working life, I spend half my time in journalism and half working in a university, and it may not just be journalists that need to think about this kind of approach. I'm conscious that when I see colleagues publishing, research or research papers, or often I sometimes think, okay, that's great, you've told me an awful lot about the problem, but where's the solution, or what are the possible solutions? So I think maybe, and I hope I don't get shot down by some of the academic colleagues we have in the audience today, but I do think academics also need to consider this kind of approach to their work. Also, I don't know if that's something you've given some thought to as well.
Why, yes. I'm so glad you you mentioned that. We actually have a dedicated staff member on our team. So if there are academics who are participating in this masterclass outside of journalism who'd like to learn more about the resources we have to support you, we actually do provide resources and support to academics who are interested in incorporating solutions journalism into their discipline. Because you're absolutely right, Ian. This isn't just about a way to do journalism, it's a way to think about the world and a way to think about problem solving in the world. So yeah, absolutely.
Thank you. Okay, we've got a couple of questions.
Yeah, and I just want to say, Ian, that I do have, if we want to take a few questions, that's great. And then I do have some resources I wanted to show.
Yes.
So if, once the question, we get through a few questions, I can show those too if we have time.
Yeah. So Murray has asked, just all the way back to the Gapminder test that we did at the beginning, and he mentions another one like the Ipsos Perils of Perception survey. He says these do a great job of testing general knowledge about the world, but do Sara and Nina know of any local equivalents to this that would, for example, explore local levels of employment or diversity or demography or poverty? Have you come across any similar kind of, tests that just challenge our perceptions of what's going on in our world locally?
I love that so much. Could you make a template for that and then everyone could fill in their own questions? I think that would be incredibly powerful. I don't know of one, but what a great idea. Please do it.
Yeah,
I love that. That's fantastic. I mean, Nina, I don't know if you know of anything like that.
No, I know Le Monde, the French newspaper, sometimes, ask the audience about what they think is true or what are their perception about one topic, and then they publish articles showing the misconceptions, but I don't know anything like this locally, and that is interesting.
Yeah, well, I think it's a great
maybe
idea.
Maybe newsrooms should do that.
Yeah, I think you're right. Okay, Sarah's got a couple of really tough questions here. Now, I don't think Sarah's expecting us to come up with the answers to the actual problem, but she's suggesting a couple of particular scenarios, and I'm wondering what the solutions journalism response to it might be, or what it might look like. So, for instance, Black Lives Matter. Okay, so we have again a global issue that people are engaged with, engaged with, and trying to understand the problem of discrimination ultimately. What would a solutions journalism, or how would you go about thinking about a possible solutions journalism approach to a problem like that?
I think that's a great segue into the resources, because we have actually worked on that. So if it's okay to share my screen and show some of those as a way to respond to that. Is that okay with you, Nina?
Yes, of course. I'll stop sharing, and it made me think of something I want to say before you share yours. And we didn't insist on this aspect enough. To do a good solution story, you first need to define the problem precisely, because climate change and Black Lives Matter and COVID-19, these are not, it's so big, it's so complicated, there are so many slices of the problem. When you're looking for a solution, you really need to define the problem first. Either you hear about the solution and then you have to define it anyway, or what precisely what the problem is, and then you're looking for a solution. It's either way. But defining the problem is really what guarantees that your solution story will be accurate.
That's such an important point that Nina made, and Any of you who work in newsrooms know that the pitching process is so important. And I would emphasize that with solutions journalism stories, really refining and honing the pitch to make sure that you can actually say very clearly and succinctly what the problem is that you're focusing on before you then dig into the response. So here's an amazing and powerful resource. I call it the solutions journalism secret weapon, that I wanted to be sure to share with all of you if you're not familiar with it. It's called the Solutions Story Tracker. And as you can see right here, we have close to 10,000 stories in here. This is a search engine. This is a proprietary search engine that is curated, right, by specialists, experts in the variety of fields that we cover. They both seek out potential solutions journalism stories and also vet stories that are submitted for consideration. And if the stories are reported through that definition that we showed you and meet those 4 criteria, they are included in this repository. So I don't know if any of you are familiar with, for example, the New York Times cooking app. So that's a closed system of really amazing recipes that are highly curated. So this would be kind of the solutions journalism equivalent. It's a closed system of published journalism. So everything in here has been published in a news outlet somewhere, but this is a closed system of curated, it's a curated slice of those stories that meet the criteria for solutions journalism from 1,200 news outlets, 175 countries, and growing every day. So I don't know if this is going to entirely answer the question about Black Lives Matter, but what we have done is created searching opportunities around anti-racism and around racial inequity in the US criminal justice system. So what you're seeing in this bar here across the top and these links that we'll go to in a minute are searches that we've already sort of prepared for you. So if you click on this link, it'll take you to a search, but you can search by any topic or theme that you like in the story tracker. But why don't we just go here, go to racial inequity in the US criminal justice system and see what's there. All right, so what you're seeing now is the search page in the story tracker, and it's loading. And as it's loading, you can see on the left that we've pre-searched, right, for racial inequity in the US criminal justice system. And so that then appears as the search term in the top. And we have 92 results, right? And so and this is, I think, sorted by date. So the most recent one is how a coalition of New York activists revealed police department secrets, right? And then we have one from the Los Angeles Times. Bankruptcy forced this California city to defund police. Here's how it changed public safety. So the question was, how do you cover responses to Black Lives Matter? But to Nina's point, and to the point that you can see here in these stories, is they take on specific slices of the problems that the Black Lives Matter movement has surfaced. So you're talking about, police brutality and defunding police. Here's a story about one city where they were forced to defund the police. So here's an example. How did it go? So why don't we look at this? So any search you do will return results that look like this. So you'll get a title and description, the news outlet, the name of the journalist. If we have their Twitter handle, that'll be there too. The date the story was published, the location, and the type of media, right? So if it's text, if it's video, if it's a podcast. And so and there'll be a short summary, right? And so you'll click on that link, and it takes you to, and this is what our team of what we call solution specialists do. Once they decide a story meets the standards, they write a brief summary and create tags for the story. So this story fits under these issue areas and these success factors. If these are things that are of interest to you, you can explore them just by clicking on any one of these. But you get your short summary, and then you can just go to the story on its original platform. So this is a story about a California city that was forced to defund the police. So this is a small slice, right, of this larger question. One of the questions, one of the concerns that Black Lives Matter has raised. And this story goes into great detail, interviewing the police chief about how this came about. So that's one example from our story tracker. And this is a really rich repository that you can explore. So I'm going to remove this search so you can just see what it looks like when you just go to this search page without having a search already in here. This is a free repository, right? So you can use it, you can share it with your colleagues, you can share it with your newsrooms, you can spend time in here exploring and examining.
Yeah, and
so,
do we need to register and sign up?
There is a sign up. And the reason why we ask people to sign up is because the Solutions Journalism Network is a nonprofit that is pretty much entirely grant funded. And all of the work that goes into creating and enriching this resource is covered by these grants. And as anyone who's ever applied for a grant knows, you have to tell the grantors, you know, you have to explain to them the impact and effectiveness of the things that you're using their money for. So if we can say, oh yes, we have X number of people using this and they come from these places, that helps them understand the value. So that's why we do that. And we also like to just kind of see, okay, who's using this and how are they using it? It's helpful to us. We don't sell your information. We don't use it for anything other than making sure that we understand who's using it and that it's being useful, and that so that we can report back to our funders. So this is the entire repository here, 9,500 stories that's just listed out here. But just looking on the left here, these are all the different ways that you can search. You can also just type anything into the search bar. You can search it by anything you like, but you can also narrow it down. So if there's a journalist that you are interested in seeing if they have anything in here, you can type their name in. If there's a news outlet, if there's a location, you can search by the location, and you can also in the US search by a region.
There is
there
is also a map, so you can see on a certain topic where the solutions, where the responses are located.
Yeah, which can be really great if you're looking for global responses. There's also the type of media. So if you are really interested in video, you can search there, radio, podcast, photojournalism. Obviously text is the biggest category, but we have many different types of media represented here. And length. I know that the examples that we showed you today are very long and sort of detailed, but it is possible to do solutions journalism in short form. So you see under text, we have 1,200 examples under 800 words. And under video, we have over 150 examples under 3 minutes. So it is possible to do solutions journalism in short form if that's something that is of interest to you.
Just a quick question, Sarah, from
Yes.
Rosemary, who wants to know what your aims are with the story tracker. In particular, are you planning to extend it to stories in other languages? Rosemary's from Germany, I think. So is that in your plans?
Yeah, so it's a project we have for a long time, but as you can guess, it's highly complicated, just technically. And we have tested it with COVID-19, where we created collections of stories in multiple languages. So we have collections of stories about containing the virus in German, but also coping with the pandemic. And so certain, aspect of the problem we made that in German, Spanish, Korean, because we have a Korean staff member in our team in New York, and French. And so that was a test, and it turned out working. So now we're building a multiple language story tracker, and it's a long-term project. It won't probably start until the fall, but yes, it's possible already to submit solution stories in other languages. So there is when you go to the story tracker, you click on submit a story, and then you choose if it's an English story or a story published in another languages, and we collect them and then we'll vet them, and when we'll be ready, it's going to be on our story tracker in German, French, Spanish. Yeah.
Terrific.
And it's a great place for journalists to get inspired. I know I had a journalist who wanted to do a solution story on how to. We have a big problem with wolves in France. They are just it's a debate that has been there for years, and she wanted to just get inspiration on what the solution stories about, cohabiting with wolves would look like. And so she could find this in the story tracker, and just it helped her understand the topic better, but also understand how she could flip frame, as we were saying earlier.
Great.
So there are a couple more resources I wanted to show you. Should we do that now, Ian, or do you want to? Should we do more questions?
Can I try? Let's try another couple of questions, because maybe that might.
Okay, let me unshare my screen then, so that.
Yeah. So just another scenario Sarah had, because Sarah had mentioned the Black Lives Matter. She mentioned a report that was published yesterday here in the UK, which is all about Russian influence in our politics here in the UK. I guess the answer to that is the same as what we're talking about. It's about defining the problem, maybe carving up the problem, and then finding a solution to that part of the problem. I guess maybe that might be the way forward with that, Sarah.
And we do have a few stories in our tracker about this particular question of the Russian influence in other countries, but
yeah, great. Okay. Katie says, under the limitations category, is it also somewhere you can put likely local opposition? In which case, how would you suggest that this is overcome? So yeah, when we're going through our 4 stages and we're looking at the limitations, I guess local opposition would sometimes be a come into that. In which case, how would you suggest this is overcome? Katie asks. I'm not sure why. I'm not sure. Well, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's not really the responsibility of the journalist to overcome the opposition. It's the responsibility of the journalist to report on objections to or concerns. If there are concerns about the response or objections to it, it's the responsibility of the journalist to include that in the story. And then those who are, implementing the response can ask them, well, how will you, I mean, you're not advocating for this response. It's not your job to overcome the obstacles. It's your job to ask the people who are implementing the response, here are the obstacles. Are you concerned about these obstacles, or do you have an idea about how you might respond? So you are reporting on it and sharing the information, and you're being as thorough as possible. So of course you want to include any concerns or objections and then get a response to those and just include them in the story. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Leslie asks, does the solutions journalism approach depend on a greater commitment to follow up on stories until answers are found? Usually stories are only followed up when there is a new development. Do journalists have to be more proactive in following up beats and stories? I think that's a great question.
I just love that question so much, because I think as journalists, I think just in general, we need to do a better job of following up. And absolutely, I mean, that's one of the things, when I'm teaching journalism, I use the story tracker and I have students go in and I say, okay, go find a story in there that needs an update. And that can be your story, because yeah, as Nina was saying, these stories they're not static. They don't just happen and then the response is finished, right? They happen over time. And so continuing to cover them, it's a great opportunity for you as a journalist, to sort of develop some expertise and show a response as it evolves or devolves. It may actually ultimately not work. We have examples of that as well, as Nina mentioned earlier. Nina, did you want to add something?
No, I just wanted to add also that it's solutions journalism is a perfect fit for Sari. And even in the Vox example, it was looking at only one part of the whole program that was implemented in Barcelona. And so that's just really great for Sari. You can have a Sari first highlighting the problem and then covering the solution or the solutions if there are many, and then following up. And the Cleveland Plan Dealer that we mentioned did a follow-up. I think 2 years after the Sari was published, they did a report looking at what changed, what remained to change, and to where the success is, but also what was still lacking from the government and the city council.
Thank you. And just a last question here, I think, before we finish up with the resources. Do Nina and Sarah think it would be difficult to sell these kinds of stories, solutions journalism stories, into the UK media? Now, Kay, I hope you don't mind. I think if it's the Kay, I think it is. Kay, maybe you're speaking from experience. Kay represents, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Kay, chambers of commerce here in the Northeast. And so I imagine Kay has tried, yes, I am that Kay, she says. Kay, maybe you've experience of trying to sell kind of positive solutions type stories into UK newspapers and maybe found that quite difficult. Because I guess it's not only journalists that are trying to get these kind of stories out there. You know, it could be public relations, corporate comms. Any advice? And I guess maybe the UK media bit is, you know, maybe we're slightly more cynical in the UK, possibly US too, but certainly in the UK we might have a slightly more cynical news media than elsewhere.
Well, personally in Europe, I have found that presenting solutions journalism not as being positive and insisting, my kids are back, so you might hear them, insisting on the fact that the main objective of solutions journalism is giving more accurate information. And if the impact is for your audience to feel good, that's a bonus, but that's not the main objective. So I think, you know, changing the way we present solutions journalism, saying it's not, you know, it is good journalism and it is rigorous, and it's not about positive news or feel good stories that also will not work forever. I mean, people get tired of too overly positive news as well as they get tired of negative news. So it's really about finding the right balance. And I found that the editors can hear that.
Yeah, I mean, just to add a little bit to that, if you remember the WHOLE, it's completing. It's more accurate because it's a more complete way of reporting. So if you say to anyone in a newsroom, you know, what you did is good, but you missed something. You missed something really important. And, you know, you don't want to miss that. And then, you know, what? I missed something? No, I didn't miss something. What did I miss? You know, and show them that there's more to this story. You need to dig deeper. You need to go further. And then you can pique their interest. You know, you don't want to go to them and say, I have a story that is just so happy. You know, you really want to tell them, look, this is a really important piece of this story that your audience is going to want to know about. And here I can point you in the right direction and give you some information that can help you do that.
And asking the audience also what they want to find will probably lead you to solutions journalism. I mean, that's how it started at the BBC in 2015. They did this research because they wanted to find out why they were losing younger audience, and people answer, we want to hear about solutions, and they really heard it. And implemented a whole solutions journalism department almost. So yeah, asking your audience like Mediacité did, you know, are you tired of coronavirus, and if yes, what do you want to hear about, will likely lead you to solutions journalism.
Great. Well, Nina and Sarah, do you want to just share with us those final resources?
Sure. Just really quickly, just want to make sure you all know what's available to you. And again, there's no cost to you for these. You just register for the website. If, you know, this is basically similar to what we did today in our learning lab, the basic toolkit. So if you wanted to share this with someone else that you know, or if you wanted to kind of reinforce what we went over today, we also have, if you want to take a deeper dive, if any of these align with an area of interest of yours, we have a health guide, an education guide, a violence guide, collaborative, if you're interested in news collaboratives, the journal, if you're an educator, we have a curriculum builder that includes lots of great resources for journalism educators. If you're an editor, we have an engagement toolkit, if that's the area that you're focused on, is audience engagement. And for those of you who are in the broadcast realm, a playbook for television. So I wanted to make sure that you were aware that all of these are available to you and to anyone else you think might be interested. So please share those with folks you think might find them useful. And I'm just looking for my other resources here. Hold on one second.
And it's also available in multiple languages. So
yes.
French, Spanish, Arabic.
Now this is our blog, and it's on Medium. It's called The Whole Story. You can see the address up there, and Ian has the links for all of these as well, thewholestory.solutionsjournalism.org. So this is just, you know, really current information about things we're focusing on that we think are interesting. This, you know, this just published on the 20th, 16 steps for innovative newsrooms to navigate a better future for themselves and their communities. We focus on journalists who are doing solutions journalism and elevate their work and their stories. We highlight some of the projects that we're focusing on. Here is a list. Again, this goes to the question earlier about Black Lives Matter. This story highlights 20 stories from our tracker on programs working to improve Black lives. So that is another resource for the person who is asking that question. Here's 5 stories on Muslim communities countering COVID-19. So our blog, I encourage you to explore it, and it has lots. It also has a whole section on how to do solutions journalism, right? And so these are just stories. These are kind of like basic primer stories that might be useful to you as you dig into this approach, answering lots of questions. I'm going to unshare my screen because I know we're about to be done here. We have a very active Facebook page. We're on Twitter, Instagram. We have newsletters. So there are lots of opportunities for you to get deeper into this approach and join the community if this is something that appeals to you.
And there is a solutions journalism in Europe, a Facebook group that is private. It's only for journalists and editors to talk to each other and share stories, share story ideas. We share advices, but other journalists share advices as well. So that you're welcome to join.
Thank you. Thank you.